The manager's voice quivered with panic as she spoke. Her words rushed and heavy with breath. Her alarmed tone mirrored the cashier's expression, which shifted from tired indifference to sheer terror. Another employee, who had been waiting behind the counter, quickly moved toward the back of the store. It was a little past 9:30 p.m. It had been a grueling day. I just finished a problematic gym session and had barely enough time to catch my breath before heading home. To top it off, I found I was out of milk. So, I decided to pop down to the convenience store beneath my apartment, knowing they closed at 10 o'clock. It was just enough time to grab some milk and browse for a snack. After picking up the milk, I had no interest in anything else, so I made my way to the counter. At that point, the store was empty, save for the 3 employees, maybe a cleaning or maintenance crew, but the store wasn't closed yet. I picked up the milk and headed toward the door, only to have the manager step in front of me. "We can't let you leave just yet," she said urgently. "It's not safe. You'll need to stay until they pass." "Who are they?" I asked, confused and frustrated. Why was she stopping me? I figured they'd want me out of the store before closing time. She paused, then shook her head as though too overwhelmed to explain. Without answering, she pulled down the metal blinds over the storefront. It wasn't even time to close yet. Not wanting to stay for whatever odd game they were playing, I moved toward the door. But before I could step outside, I froze. A man in an old yet fancy suit with a tall top hat stood outside, looking as though he'd stepped straight out of the 1920s. Seconds later, I heard a chilling scream from behind me. I turned to see the cashier, her hands over her mouth, tears streaming down her face. The manager returned to the front and, upon seeing me standing by the door, quickly barked, "Get away from the door," complied, walking back to her. But before I could ask anything, she snapped again. "Hide behind the aisle. Stay there until I tell you it's safe. If you don't, you'll die tonight. Go." Fear mixed with confusion, but something in her tone made me obey. I didn't know what was going on or why we were in danger, but I figured listening was my best bet. I placed the milk on the counter and hid behind a row of shelves at the back of the store. I stood there for a while, feeling awkward and uneasy. I tried turning on my phone, but it wouldn't work. It wasn't dead when I left my apartment, so I was left to wait. I could hear the manager speaking with the cashier in hushed tones, both of them sounding on edge. A couple of minutes passed, and then I listened to the automatic doors open. Footsteps echoed across the store as someone walked in. The sound stopped at the counter, and the room went eerily quiet, broken only by the voice of the man who'd been outside. "Good evening." "Hello." The cashier barely managed to reply, her voice trembling. "Could you direct me to your meats?" he asked, his tone cordial. I peeked around the corner and saw him standing at the counter. He was the same man from outside, now towering over the cashier in his top hat. He was much taller than I expected, around 6 feet 5 inches or 6 feet 6 inches. The cashier nervously pointed to a section. "We have lunch meats, turkey, ham, over there." The man smiled politely, but then he corrected her. "I'm afraid that's not what I'm looking for. I was told there would be a fair stock of freshly harvested meats." I don't know what you mean, sir," the cashier stammered. "I believe you do," he replied, his voice cold as he locked eyes with her. She looked down, visibly shaken. He didn't move, his gaze fixed on her like a machine awaiting its following command. The manager emerged from behind the shelves. Calm but distant, she addressed the man. "How can we assist you, sir?" The man turned slowly, his appearance pristine, clean-shaven and impeccably groomed, and his eyes gleamed as they met hers. "Good evening," he repeated, smiling gently. "I was told there would be a stock of freshly harvested meat." The manager took a deep breath and met his gaze. Unfortunately, we're out of fresh meat at the moment. If you return later, we'll have a new shipment, but we don't have anything right now. I appreciate your understanding." The man's smile faltered for a brief moment as he stared at her, motionless, for what felt like an eternity. Finally, his smile returned. "I understand. I'll return," he said softly. "Good night to you both." Then he turned and walked out, the automatic doors swishing closed behind him. As soon as he left, the cashier broke into tears. The manager quickly walked over, placed a comforting arm around her, and led her toward the back of the store. Curious, I followed them. They stopped at the back corner where I'd been hiding, and the manager opened a janitor's closet. Inside, the third employee I'd noticed earlier was on the phone, though not with a cell phone, but an old-fashioned landline, likely the store's main phone. The manager crouched beside the weeping cashier, helping her to the floor of the closet before turning to speak to the third employee on the phone. "Did you reach them?" she asked quietly, concern edging her voice. "They're still trying to figure out how to get here. Could take some time. Can you manage alone out there?" came the reply. The manager sighed deeply and nodded, shutting the door behind her before turning to face me. "We might be here for a while," she said. "One of my employees is on the phone trying to get help, and the other isn't fit for anything right now. So you need to listen carefully, do exactly as I say. We don't have a choice. If you leave, if you do anything wrong, if you don't follow my orders, we'll all die. Understand?" "Yeah, I understand," I replied, though I wasn't sure if I truly believed any of this. I was still entirely in the dark about what was happening. I had no clue who the strange man in the suit was, or who the employee in the closet was trying to contact. The manager moved behind the counter near the register, and for a brief moment, I thought about running. I could escape through the door, get back to my apartment, and avoid whatever bizarre prank this was. But before I could plan anything, the automatic doors opened again. I heard footsteps, quieter but rushed. The manager signaled for me to hide, and I quickly ducked beneath the counter. I hurried back to my previous spot behind the aisles, my heart pounding. Then I heard it, a strange, wheezing breath, like an older man struggling to breathe, followed by quick, frantic footsteps. The creature moved erratically, its footsteps coming closer, then farther away, then closer again. It was walking through the aisles, inspecting each one. It would eventually reach mine. I held my breath, praying I wouldn't be seen as I tried to think of a way to stay hidden. When it got to the aisle before mine, I took my chance. I ducked around the corner, barely breathing, and peered out. It wasn't a person. The creature stood about 4 or 5 feet tall, its skin unnaturally pale, almost translucent. Its spine was grotesquely hunched, the bones jutting out as though ready to pierce through its flesh. Its legs were spindly and frail, as if they couldn't bear its weight. The feet were reptilian, like those of a lizard. As it turned the corner, I saw its arms short, with large, gnarled hands ending in dirty, black nails. Its torso was emaciated, the skin stretched tightly over its ribs, like it hadn't eaten in ages. But the face, it was the worst part. The jaw was unnaturally long, with sharp teeth that gleamed white and impossibly long, much too large for its mouth. Its gums were black and decaying. The eyes were human-like but sickly, with a greenish tint, and its nose was nothing more than a small, flat bump. A few stray white hairs clung to its scalp. I quickly moved to another aisle as it finished its sweep of the store. When it finally exited, still wheezing and dragging its feet, I allowed myself a brief moment to breathe. The automatic doors opened again. This time, the manager's voice rang out, calling for me to come to the front. I stepped cautiously from my hiding place and moved toward the counter. The door remained open, but no one had entered yet. "Get behind the counter. Don't say a word. Just smile when they do," the manager instructed firmly. Smile when who? I began, but my question was cut short when a child suddenly ran through the door. A child? At this hour? Alone? Where were the parents? More followed, 6 in total. They appeared to be around 5 or 6 years old. They started running through the store, laughing, playing some game like tag or hide and seek, and acting like children normally would. Let them be, the manager murmured. Just do as I told you. Smile when they smile. I stood there, trying to force myself to smile as I watched them play. After a few minutes, they stopped and formed a single-file line in front of the counter. Each child grabbed a candy bar from the small display near the register. The first one approached, $1 and some change in hand. The amount was exactly right for the candy, but I wasn't sure anyone would care if it weren't. After placing the money on the counter, the child turned and locked eyes with me. I couldn't help but feel uncomfortable. It didn't show any emotion, just stared at me like any child might. Yet something was off. Then it smiled, an unsettling, unnatural grin that stretched from ear to ear, the corners of its mouth pulling back far beyond what should have been possible. Its teeth, long, jagged, and sharp, were exposed in a grotesque display. I couldn't hold my smile any longer. The child noticed my discomfort, and that's when the manager's voice cut through. Smile back, she said sharply. Reluctantly, I forced my smile back on, staring at the creature as it held its gaze with mine. It giggled before snatching the candy bar and running out of the store. One by one, the others came up to the counter, each doing the same. They all smiled at me. Grins too wide, too unnatural, and I smiled back, my insides crawling with disgust. The last one was a little troublemaker. It ran around the store, giggling, but didn't grab a candy bar. Instead, it went straight for the janitor's closet. I could hear the struggle as it yanked open the door, sending the cashier flying across the floor. The creature looked at the employee on the phone, then said in a sing-song voice, "I'm going to tell on you," before running out, still laughing. The cashier appeared unconscious. The other employee peeked out from the closet, now without a door. He turned to the manager, his voice shaky. "What do we do now? We don't know which one of those things will wake up. Our people haven't arrived yet. We need to leave. Now." "No, we both know that won't end well for us," the manager said firmly. "We need to stay put until this passes or until the team arrives. Take the phone. Hide in the back. We need to stay in touch. If we don't, we're as good as dead." With that, she ducked behind the counter. I glanced at the other employees still holding the phone, and together, we sprinted toward the back corner of the store. As I glanced over my shoulder, I realized we had forgotten something. The cashier was still lying unconscious on the floor. I hesitated, wanting to help her, but the employee beside me grabbed my arm, shaking his head. "Don't. It's too late." His voice, trembling with fear, made my heart sink. I knew he was right. I dropped to the ground, feeling weak in the knees, and sat against the wall. The store fell unnervingly silent, too quiet, and then came the unmistakable sound of hooves striking the floor. The sound was heavy and deliberate, like something massive was coming closer. Laughter followed, sick and twisted. It sounded like an adult, maybe a man, but there was something wrong with it. The heavy steps moved toward the aisles, closer and closer. My breath caught in my throat as I inched toward the edge of the aisle to get a better look. What came into view was a nightmare. The twisted and unnatural legs of a deer supporting the body of something that looked human, at least partially. It was dressed in a garish red and blue clown outfit, a jester's hat perched atop its head. Its body stretched the fabric of the costume, its arms and shoulders much too large. The face was painted, a shiny, pale white, with black around the eyes and lips and a round red ball for a nose. It stopped in front of the aisle, right by the broken door and the unconscious cashier. The clown bent down with surprising ease, lifting her by the neck as if she weighed nothing. It studied her with a tilted head, inspecting her like some specimen. The employee beside me was whispering into the phone, urgently relaying what we were seeing, though the voice on the other end was muffled and distant. The cashier's eyes fluttered open, and when she saw what was holding her, her face turned pale with terror. She screamed. The clown recoiled at the sound, disgusted. Then, with a swift motion, it sank its teeth into her neck, silencing her instantly. It took another bite before grabbing her head and tearing it from her body with an ease that made me sick. Blood sprayed everywhere, splattering against the shelves and the floor. The head landed near our hiding spot, just a few feet away. I couldn't bring myself to look at it, but the clown wasn't finished. "I know you're over there," it taunted, its voice a twisted blend of joy and malice. "Want me to show you a trick?" The employee dropped the phone in panic and tried to make a run for it. He didn't get far. The clown moved in an instant, blocking his path. The employee crashed into it, but the creature didn't flinch. With terrifying strength, it grabbed the employee by the wrists, lifting him off the ground. Then it pulled violently, mercilessly. The employee screamed as his arms were ripped from their sockets, the sound of bone tearing through the air. The clown laughed, amused by the pain, before kicking him in the head with a force that crushed his skull. I stared at the phone, hearing the feedback from whoever was still on the line. My fingers trembled as I picked it up. "Hello?" I whispered, my voice hoarse and trembling. "You need to bind it. Turn on the flashlight. Point it at its eyes. Do you hear me?" I wasn't sure it would work, but I had to try. It had to. I pulled my phone out of my pocket. It was on, and somehow it was fully charged. I hadn't charged it. It didn't make sense, but it didn't matter. The clown's voice rang out again, mocking me from the center of the store. "Don't think I forgot about you. I've got another trick for you. You'll love it." I dropped the store phone and, like the other employee, I ran. My feet pounded against the floor as I bolted down the aisle, but I had no clear destination in mind. Panic gripped me. My cell phone slipped from my pocket and hit the ground. I scrambled to retrieve it, desperately trying to turn the flashlight on as I heard the clopping of hooves behind me. As I was grabbed from behind, I barely managed to turn on the flashlight in time. The clown screamed in fury and pain as the light hit its eyes. It recoiled, running past me and tearing through the aisles in a blind rage. Shelves were knocked over, and merchandise scattered like confetti as it trashed the store, thrashing about. I didn't stop. I kept the flashlight aimed in its direction, praying it would work. The clown tripped over a shelf it had torn apart, falling flat on its face. It quickly scrambled to its feet, swatting at me. But when the light met its eyes again, it screamed and covered its face, stumbling back. It dashed toward the door, tripping and yelling, until it finally left, leaving behind only silence. The manager, who had been hiding behind the counter, emerged slowly. She took in the scene, her fallen employees, the destruction, the blood, and I saw it in her eyes. Something had died inside her the moment she saw what was left of them. But she didn't speak of it. She turned to me, her expression hollow. "Where's the phone?" she asked, her voice flat. I turned off my flashlight and shoved my phone back into my pocket before walking over to the mangled pile of merchandise and blood at the back of the store. I found the store phone and brought it to the front, handing it to the manager, who didn't move from her spot, still staring at the grisly scene. She took the phone and started talking to someone on the other end. I ignored the words. They were too quiet to hear, too distant to understand. I could only focus on the bodies, the mess, the horrible reality of it all. After a few moments, the manager sighed, relief mixed with exhaustion. "Okay, thank God. How long more?" she muttered into the phone. "More talking. All right, I can do that. There's still one alive. I'll have him keep watch." She hung up the phone and turned to me. Her eyes were drained, weary. "I need you to stand by the door. Watch for the black SUVs. Let me know when they get here. If it's them, yell, and I'll tell you what to do next. If it's not, hide. I've got something to take care of in the back." Without asking more questions, I nodded. Whoever these people were, they had to be our way out of this nightmare. I walked over to the automatic doors, my heart pounding. Outside, the street looked normal, just like I remembered. Empty. The world felt eerily still. I stood there, waiting by the door, hearing the manager moving around in the back. It gave me time to process everything I had just witnessed. It was too much to handle at once, and my thoughts and emotions spun out of control. But above all, I needed to understand what had just happened. What was that thing? What were they? For the next few minutes, I tried to make sense of it all, running through the possibilities in my mind. But none of them offered any real answers. And I still don't have one. Then, the black SUVs finally pulled up outside. A group of men in tactical gear, carrying rifles, and others in formal suits poured out of the vehicles. There were 4 or 5 SUVs, and around 6 men stepped out of each one. I quickly turned toward the back of the store and yelled, "Hey, is this them? They're here." But I got no response. "Hey!" I yelled again, this time walking toward the back. As I reached the last aisle, I saw the store phone lying on the ground. I was about to pick it up when I heard frantic voices on the other end. "We're here. Do you copy? Hello? Our team is entering now. Are you still with us? Hello?" Before I could grab the phone, I backed up, walking around the corner to the final aisle. What I saw froze me in my tracks. The manager was lying on the floor, her body splayed out in a pool of blood. A man crouched over her, his face familiar. He was the one from earlier. The tall man with the old-fashioned suit and hat, but now without the hat and coat. He held a large knife and was carving into the manager's body. Her organs were scattered around them, a gruesome scene. He looked up from his work, his eyes meeting mine, and smiled. Without skipping a beat, he spoke. "I did say I'd be back for the meat. Didn't have any trouble harvesting it myself." With that, he pulled her heart out and held it up like it was a piece of fine art, admiring it before placing it in a suitcase beside him and closing it. He stood, casting a glance at me, then down at his knife. "I'm sure you'll give me fine cuts, too," he added with a grin, his tone unsettlingly calm. Then, with a grunt of annoyance, he charged toward me. I spun around and ran for the door, but he stopped abruptly as he saw the men approaching from outside. "Well, aren't you the lucky one tonight?" he muttered, slipping the knife into a sheath in his vest. With a casual air, he turned back, heading down the aisle. He returned moments later, carrying the manager's lifeless body over his shoulder like it was nothing, her body limp and weightless. He walked past me, heading toward the janitor's closet. I'd sworn the door had been ripped off its hinges only minutes ago, but now it was standing intact. The man opened it, and a cold rush of air poured out. From the slight angle I had, I caught a glimpse of a body hanging from a meat hook inside. He tossed the manager's body inside, then turned around, grabbing the door handle. As he looked back at me one last time, he spoke in a friendly tone. "Good day." The automatic doors slid open behind me, and a swarm of armed men rushed in. Half a dozen of them immediately moved toward the closet, weapons raised. They opened the door, only to find nothing inside but emptiness. One of them screamed, his frustration evident. "Been after that son of a bitch for months. How does he get away every time?" he muttered under his breath. The rest of the team scattered through the store, some bringing in strange equipment. They moved quickly, collecting hairs from the floor, using black lights to trace footprints left by the hunchbacked monster. I couldn't keep track of it all, but I noticed the small things. They gathered up the loose change and dollar bills the children had been playing with. Eventually, 2 large boxes were brought in to collect the bodies of the other workers. I remained unseen, unnoticed among the chaos. A few minutes passed before a man in a suit approached me. He didn't seem interested in asking questions. He looked like he had something to say, and that was it. I know this is a lot to take in, and I know none of it makes sense. There's no way we can explain it in a way that would make sense to you, he started, his voice low but heavy with meaning. I'm sorry for everything you had to witness tonight, but there's nothing we can do. These things are doing this to people all around the world for reasons we still don't understand. This store, in particular, has been targeted 7 times now. We're trying to stop it. We're one of the few teams out there doing something about it. He paused for a moment, letting his words sink in before continuing. We need you to stay quiet about all this. If people find out, if word gets out, we'll be shut down. None of this will ever get fixed. More people will die, and it will just keep getting worse. If you want to stop more of this, you need to keep your mouth shut. He exhaled sharply, almost as if he were done. Then, his expression softened with pity as he gestured toward the door. You can walk out those doors whenever you're ready. I didn't answer him. I didn't say a word. The weight of his words settled on me, but I didn't plan on staying silent. What happened to those workers, what I saw tonight, it needed to be known. People had to be warned, even if I didn't let him know that just yet. I walked through the automatic doors, stepping into the street filled with their vehicles. I glanced back at the store. The lights were on and it was empty. Turning back toward the street, I noticed the SUVs had already gone. The world had gone back to normal, or at least appeared to. People walked casually along the sidewalks as if nothing had happened. The metro train rumbled in the distance, its arrival marking the end of an ordinary night. But for me, it was far from ordinary. It was over for now. But the truth, it couldn't be buried. Thanks for listening. Stay tuned for more stories in the coming weeks. If you enjoyed this, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Take care and have a good night.